In prison, it was the first time my colleagues and I learned about the underreported Riyadh Agreement. The Emir of Qatar signed on the document, but Qatar failed to honor the conditions of the private accords reached in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia on November 23, 2013, in the presence of key members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The details of the accord were not fully published. We were working at the Marriott Hotel in Egypt at the time. Eventually, I learned that the accords had committed the Qatari Emir to implement changes to Qatar's foreign policies, prevent Muslim Brotherhood members from appearing on Al Jazeera, and he was to review the channel's hypercritical programming of Egypt and the GCC, and refrain from supporting groups designated as terrorists and hosting and sponsoring fugitives, for example, from Bahrain, Saudi, and others like Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and members of the Hamas leadership, a group designated as terrorists in the US and Canada, among other nations. Al Jazeera's CEO, Chairman Hamad bin Thamir al-Thani, a cousin of the Qatar Emir, must have known about these negotiations, but he chose to ignore them and kept us honest journalists working on the field in Egypt in the dark. The network had received warnings from heads of states and diplomats regarding its operation in Egypt and its support of the Muslim Brotherhood, but chose to put the story ahead of the security of its staff. There's an affidavit in the press kit from a Doha former senior Al Jazeera anchor, and he speaks about the fact that none of the anchors or journalists were informed about the articles of the Riyadh Agreement. In my lawsuit in Canada, one of the main angles I aim to prove to the judge is that the Qatari government controls Al Jazeera's general editorial line. Days ago, the government of Bahrain broadcast 4 phone calls that took place in 2011 at the peak of the anti-government protests, a conversation between Hamad Khalifa al-Atiyah, the advisor to the Qatari Emir, and Hassan Ali Sultan, a Bahraini opposition member designated as a terrorist. You may read the literal translation of these horrific phone calls in the press kit. I will mention a couple of lines that caught my eye. Hassan Ali says, "I'm talking to you with Abu Khalifa based on your request that I inform you of any information regarding the police forces and the declaration of national emergency. We expect the flow of blood." The Qatari Emir's advisor answers, "Yes, I will immediately carry this story on Al Jazeera. We have no problem to put this out now." The Bahraini man, designated as a terrorist, responds, "The thugs are the forces. They have weapons and are trawling the villages wearing civilian clothes." The guy answers, "Who is the person that I can get Al Jazeera to get in touch with you to get this information? Shall I get them to call you and use an alias? I need 2 minutes to prepare. Get back to me." One comedian put it and said, "Seems that the Emir of Qatar and his advisors are the executive producers of the segments and the programs at Al Jazeera." I wish it were funny, but it is not. Hamad Khalifa al-Atiyah is also the brother of Abdulaziz al-Atiyah, convicted in absentia to 7 years in Lebanon in 2014 for funding Jabhat al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda branch in Syria. He was recently designated as a terrorist by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, among many Qataris with close ties to the Al-Thani family who live freely in Qatar. During the course of my research in prison, I interviewed many Muslim Brotherhood youth who explained to me the extent of the unethical and illegal relationship they had with Al Jazeera. Many of them sold footage to the network that was aired without sourcing or proper vetting. Astonishingly, some even received cameras and broadcast equipment directly from the network or indirectly through the Muslim Brotherhood with the knowledge of the senior managers at the network. Some of the Al Jazeera journalists on the field, like myself and my esteemed colleagues, were not informed of such illegal and unethical practices. It's not citizen journalism, as Al Jazeera likes to call it. It's taking sides in the conflict and endangering the lives of your reporters and becoming part of the struggle rather than just reporting on it. Ali Hashem, a prominent reporter, and 2 other correspondents quit from the Al Jazeera Beirut office in 2012 over the network's bias. In a news report, he said, Al Jazeera has supplied Syrian rebels with satellite communication tools to ensure telephone and internet connection. The channel paid $50,000 for smuggling phones and other tools across the Syrian border to ensure they would get an inside picture. The channel was taking a stance. It was meddling with each and every detail of reports of the Syrian revolution. Hashim called Al Jazeera's policy information suicide. I was told by my former colleagues at Al Jazeera that Kelly Jarrett, the executive producer of news at Al Jazeera English, instructed the staff to stop referring to al-Nusra as an Al-Qaeda affiliate, The reality is that Al-Qaeda isn't the organization it used to be. That's what the email says. How could you normalize a brutal and more murderous organization like Al-Qaeda? Poor Kelly. She must have received that call from the executive producer at the Qatar's Emir's office. It must have been that. The reality is that Qatar does not consider Al-Nusra Front or Al-Qaeda as terrorists. In fact, many of Qataris designated as terrorists by the US and the UN for funding such extremists for many years with millions of dollars are living freely in Qatar. They're on Twitter, some of them. And that's the main reason for the Qatar blockade and the Gulf Rift today. It is a dangerous time for Al Jazeera staff, and I hope none of my former colleagues have to go through what Peter Greste, Bahir Mohammed, and myself went through in that terrorism wing. Thank you very much.